7:59 a.m. on May 16, 2021. I'm going to make a brief verbal outline of what I'm going to do in the next few days to present formal charges against current Senator John Cornyn, current Senator Ted Cruz, and former Secretary of Energy Rick Perry. I'll start with Rick Perry. The first thing to identify is his role specifically in the implementation of the Gubernatorial Commission on Biotech, Biomedicine, Bioengineering, and Nanotechnology. It has a specific title. I think it's actually Biotechnology, Biomedicine, Nanotechnology, and Bioengineering. My understanding is that it was passed for implementation to begin in 2005. If nothing else, it appeared in the 2005 edition of Texas Vernon's legal codes, and the invocation of an explication of the commission had supplanted what was the first section of the Small Business Code for the state of Texas. This was in the 2005 edition. I do not have that specific book, but I have looked at it personally and I took notes. And while the handwritten notes were stolen, were there to be subpoenaed or presented a copy of the 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007 editions of Texas Vernon's legal codes in the actual bound edition, and then one would see in the actual bound book edition the introduction to the Small Business Code having been replaced by that gubernatorial commission. Now, the publicly available information in the electronic records has it situated differently, but the concern becomes one of, is it connected to the development of Army Futures Command and the operationalization of Army Futures Command in connection with its small business proposal that was presented before the Senate in July of 2019. And the manners in which those two correlations, including the fact that the Army Futures Command has 3 centers here in Texas, call into question the role of Perry specifically while he was governor in influencing federal policy connected to the engagement of the onset of Army Futures Command, and to determine whether there's actually evidence to identify and confirm an intent to use the gubernatorial commission in order to allow for the development of biological weapons, up to and including biological weapons involving nanotechnology in the form of a vaccine or the form of an immunization, and how that might be correlated with other matters. Which brings up the second concern, specifically regarding him as Secretary of Energy. Was there a direct connection in terms of the decision to make him the Secretary of Energy at the time he was the Secretary of Energy, connected to anything he did while he was the governor during the onset of that specific commission? Now, I understand he was on the board of Energy Transfer Partners during a time when there was significant contestation about the role in Energy Transfer Partners regarding the Dakota Access Pipeline, and that among the things had to that concern had to do with a situation wherein prior to the swearing in of Donald Trump and prior to the appointment of Rick Perry, there were a series of incidents on site at the area in North Dakota, including one where there was use of a water cannon during the winter, and the fire cannon ended up being used against protesters in manners that actually broke people's bones. My concern is that that specific incident or other incidents connected to a confrontation up at the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota may have been disabused, comparable to other manners in which medical records, including medical records for billings and coding of medical records for specific kinds of broken bones, were used in the course of developing not only the actual biological weapon itself, but also the financing for its proliferation and dissemination. which brings up the other matter specifically concerning Perry's relationship while Secretary of Energy to A, any interference that the Department of Energy may have had in the consideration of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's decision to engage in or support efforts at human factors testing of people involved in industrial inspection. B, the incident that happened in December of 2019, prior to his formal resignation, regarding the two announcements on, I believe, December 19th of 2019, including the one for the small nuclear reactors that was done the same day as the notice regarding the emergency preparedness and prevention on behalf of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that was numerically coded to the two extra electronic accounts for Social Security that were given to me when I attempted to obtain a replacement Social Security card in February of 2018. And if it had anything to do specifically with the interference in getting any responses from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or any other entity after I attempted to report the fraudulently issued document from May 11th of 2017 that I understood was being used as a derivative for speculation on uranium reportings from Cameco, and how that was connected to my witnessing of local events that had an impact on international terrorist attacks in multiple countries, including Egypt and Nigeria, and whether or not that was coordinated in connection with other elements of the Houston energy sector's sponsorship of museums, wherein these incidents that ended up having a local impact on what was reported as an international terrorist attack occurred. Finally, in terms of Perry's role specifically, is the concern regarding the Take Your Daughters to Work Day that was had at the Department of Energy in a very specific timeline from the Take Your Children to Work Day at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Houston, which was a day where I was on site at the Federal Bureau of Investigation office in Houston, Texas. I read through my proposed piece of legislation regarding non-destructive testing, and not only that, but while I was not permitted to turn in the report I had printed out with me at the time, the report from February of 2017, the one I had taken with me when I went to the neuropsychiatric center, hoping they would refer me to law enforcement up to and including potentially federal law enforcement or an appropriate reporting authority, including somebody that could have been made accessible if they were actually legitimately engaged with the Health and Human Services Department and or even the CDC, but refused to even acknowledge the same report I had when I was attempting to report actual acts of child abuse to which I had been witness to mandated reporters but was refused any assistance with, and the same report I actually turned in to Senator Ted Cruz's office prior to being on site at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they refused to take that or any other report or evidence I had with me at the time, but they did make a photocopy of that fraudulently issued document dated for May 11, 2017. Was there any correlation between my on-site visit to the FBI in Houston with those correlations and a strategically timed event wherein the Department of Energy sponsored a Take Your Daughter to Work Day? I contend it is evidence of an intent to traffic the children of federal workers as part of this kickback scheme, and may also be involved with intentionally exposing certain children to biological weapons in order to compel them to get medical treatment that can be used to traffic them. One. Second is Senator John Cornyn, specifically regarding allegations that while he was Attorney General of Texas, he was engaged in activities that there was an incident involving allegations that he had been responsible for a number of arrests of African American men in a manner that demonstrated an intentionally racialized pattern and abuse of justice. Concurrent to that time frame, he was also in a situation where he was providing through the office of the Attorney General letters, or rather opinions, that were issued at the request of constituents that had formal questions. In the specific case I'm speaking of, it was a legislator from the state of Texas, and he describes through his legal opinion that's signed on by 4 other people, as well as I understand is part of the process, at least in the state of Texas. A situation which I understand is actually a form of potential automation used in this kickback scheme and used in this racketeering that I've been personally subject to and witness to the entire time since I've returned to Texas. I believe that what it shows is a demonstrable pattern that can be engaged as part of a systematology, and that there is evidence of concurrences between that opinion as well as other opinions. I've only investigated 3 of his opinions that show that the allegations concerning the appearance of the methodology by which this pattern of racketeering has been engaged in the state of Texas is connected to the efforts that were undertaken while Cornyn was the Attorney General. Now, it may predate that, especially in consideration of much of the Texas history regarding the permanent fund for public education, but I contend there's a specific and demonstrable connection between that opinion and other actions that have happened, and including the 3 years worth of Texas Vernon's legal code specific to public information, and the manners in which cases concerning whistleblowers, specifically at ISDs, are pitted with the case concerning Boeing and the state of Texas in a form of automation that is actually apparent and that has been demonstrated the entire time I've been in Texas, at least in consideration of my efforts to obtain access to resources. Secondly, insofar as he was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, I specifically and personally contacted him and his office several times about serious national security related matters, and they engaged in efforts to undermine me while they refused to provide support or take what I had at the time that was material evidence of ongoing crimes, including crimes that could potentially implicate people in acts of terrorism. First, having to do with the effort I made at the end of 2017 to contact his office after I had information that there was an attempt to sabotage something in consideration of the upcoming G20 conference in Argentina. This was around the time that it now later was revealed that there was a submarine that was registered to the nation of Argentina that went missing. A year later, that submarine was found, or was announced as having been found, at the bottom of the ocean after it had gone down. Specifically, I contacted him after I found that information out because I was concerned that the relationship between what happened with that submarine was connected to speculation going on in another part of the country involving people from the opposition political party that were using some sort of strategy associated with the other Texas senator, and it was incumbent upon him to provide support. He completely refused to acknowledge this and never got back to me. Second, I was on site at his office in Houston, specifically after I had encountered information that I understood was incredibly alarming at a national security level, including in consideration of the fact that I had just been issued fraudulent and intentionally coded documents associated with my efforts to get a replacement birth certificate and a replacement social security card, as well as what was alleged at least to be official electronic records provided by the United States Air Force, as well as the United States Army Reserve, that I believe were using the other senator as well as him in some particular kind of strategy that was aimed at undermining the federal government system and allowing for the possibility of infiltration of federal agencies, including ones connected to national security, in order to accomplish ulterior motives. Additionally, there had also been an incident involving a major funder, the CEO of a major investment firm that is heavily invested in pension systems in the state of Texas, both through the local police departments as well as in connection with what was later revealed to be significant deals by the President of the United States and other countries up to and including Saudi Arabia. And that there was a problem that was ongoing with the Transportation Workers Identification Credential Card database that was set to be overhauled around the time I went on site to his office with the evidence. And when I went on site to his office, there were two people there, including one person who was wearing a badge identifying himself as being connected to the Treasury, and they told me to call Dallas. Less than 3 months later, I had been trafficked out of Houston to Austin and out of Austin to Dallas, and to this time, nobody has contacted me back. I also contacted Cornyn's office about the fact that the back end of emails that he sent to me as a response to, his office contacted me twice with email notifications, one of which I understood was to place options on futures for himself connected to his support of Social Security. By the way, I've only been allowed to talk to people who are legally of the age to draw on Social Security since I've been trafficked to Dallas. But besides just that, was the understanding that there were specific catches in his email. The email responses he sent to me were intentionally set up to hack me and to relay information about other information I had in my email account back to his office. I contacted his office directly about this. There was no response, and until this day, there's been no response. In addition, there are other charges that are not about me specifically and directly, but connected to his actions as senator, including whatever it was that involved the public acknowledgement of him no longer being a member of the Intel Committee, but somehow becoming a member of the Armed Forces Committee, while it was publicly reported that the senator from Virginia I first attempted to contact had some sort of swap in his committee assignments concurrently. Third, Senator Ted Cruz. The first thing to consider is what he did when he was working with the Federal Trade Commission, specifically during a time frame wherein cases had been brought up concerning subsidiaries associated with Raytheon, as well as another technology company that I understood is specifically connected to Aegis and the situation around Aegis. Did Ted Cruz do things while he was at the Federal Trade Commission that put him into a systematology where he was availed of the same sort of nexus of crime that former Governor Bruce Rauner was engaged with when it came to the litigation involving his investment firm in Florida? There was a consortium of nursing homes, and in the course of this there was an entity called Trans Health. This Trans Healthcare entity also was connected to a project or an entity that was identified as Aegis Healthcare. My concern is that what was happening is there was strategic investment in programs that had names that could be used in some form of contract bidding on things up to and including military contracts and that they were disabusing their alleged support of healthcare in order to put people into or avail themselves of the benefits of R&D that had been illegally performed on individuals under the auspices of healthcare, but that was itself used in the development of technologies associated with various weapons paradigms. The question is, did Ted Cruz provide himself with any undue advantage or influence when he was involved with the Federal Trade Commission during the time frame when those cases occurred? Did that influence or impact the relationship he had while he was Solicitor General in Texas in the course of preparing for what later came about as his run for the United States Senate? And did he have a specific and direct connection to what ended up happening when I personally came to Texas, and with what happened with when my former partner came to Texas from another country for a program of study at Rice University in Houston? My allegation is that after presumably his wife was identified as having a mental illness, that there was a conspiracy to swap elements of my identity out with hers, and that I have been, in part with all the other things that have happened, trafficked specifically for his benefit, including in manners that have used my identity to deal with matters related to whatever it was that was used in connection with leaning on his wife or attempting to engage his wife in illicit activity, either for his benefit or for the benefit of others with whom he was associated. There is evidence not only of direct transactional events in my life, up to and including the first time I was entered into the psychiatric emergency services in San Francisco, but there's also evidence that my father's service record was likewise disabused. Since I've been in Texas, following the kidnapping, I've attempted to contact his office several times. I have provided him with reports. I provided him with proposed pieces of legislation. I even provided him with an outline of what I understood would have been a viable investigation into the financial sector for its relationship to crimes ongoing at the time that were, if they were not forestalled, could potentially create material conditions for further perpetuation of even graver crimes, which has come to be. And in the meantime, there has been no movement and no response on those. Did Ted Cruz literally steal my work products, up to and including abusing his position as a member of the State Bar of Texas, the former Solicitor General of Texas, in order to use my legal filings and use my work efforts to develop weapons and give them as kickbacks or give contracts connected to weapons development based on the theft of my work products as kickbacks to other people, including in the weapons sector, while not only he violated my rights to due process, but engaged in even more grave crimes, up to and including crimes that would implicate the aforementioned matters associated with the charges against former Governor and former Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, and former Senator and former Attorney General of Senator and former Attorney General of Texas John Cornyn, specifically related to trafficking children as a means by which to allow for the perpetuation of a kickback scheme, including a kickback scheme that awards military contracts or allows for illegal hedging on or bidding on military contracts to people that are willing to cover up for their culpability in these matters. This is directly connected to the fact that right now, without any protest from either Texas senator or the former governor or the current governor or any member of the legislature, that Texas is currently in flagrant violation of its own constitution regarding public information. It was through the public information requirements for the state of Texas that this specific kickback scheme was operationalized for at least 2 years, that I was personally witness to and subject to in the state of Texas, before they started confidentializing information that would have been able to verify or provide a means by which the citizens, if they were well informed, could have mitigated against any of the perils associated with being subjected to this kind of kickback scheme. But they intentionally allowed for unconstitutional legislation to be put into effect in order to manipulate and maintain this conspiracy. Now, these are direct charges. I contend I already have more than enough evidence in order to move forward on them. And I contend that not only are they impeachable offenses insofar as senators are members of the government and eligible for impeachment, but they are indictable offenses, and that they need to be carried out in accordance with a criminal proceeding. I also have here another argument concerning immunity and the concept of what it means not to waive immunity, but to have a form of retraction or of immunity, as has already been discussed in opinions all the way up to the level of the Supreme Court of the United States in just the last 2.5 to 3 years. Now, I do still contend that due to existing opinions that have been issued by the court, specifically by and during the Burger Court of the Supreme Court of the United States, that these proxy proceedings and that any sort of Supreme Court proceeding that has not been on site with the impanelment of the full court on site is not constitutionally valid by the rules of the court and in consideration of opinions the court itself has made about what constitutes a legally binding Supreme Court process. But at the same time, thus far, that has not been challenged. I would issue a challenge to say that any sort of opinion that has been rendered by the court concerning a proceeding that was not on site before a full impanelment of the court is not constitutionally binding. But prior to that, there's at least one case, and since that time frame, there's at least one case where the elements of sovereign immunity are directly addressed by the court, including in more than a waiver, but other descriptions of manners in which sovereign immunity can be addressed. In this consideration, I also believe that as actual, for Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz specifically, as actual members of the Senate, they have jurisdiction that is national through their committee assignment, but also through the position they have in the legislative activities they have, which impact the entire country. And as such, they are components of the body politic of the Senate. So when it comes to a consideration of permission to prosecute, that there needs to be a consideration of the permission from the body of the Senate, as opposed to just merely the individual senator. I do not know if there is precedent already for that argument to say that, for instance, a waiver or a retraction of sovereign immunity and or allowing or the kind of permission, for instance, that one would need to provide in order to be held to prosecution when one is eligible for immunity is exclusively about the individual, but rather about a consideration of that individual as a representative of the people in a full body. And so does the self, or does the consideration of the permission needed for them individually to be held to a criminal proceeding have a course of redress from the entirety of the Senate? Now, I'm also on the record and have not relented on saying the entire Senate, under another case and in consideration of other charges, should be considered for impeachment based upon a unanimous voice vote that they gave in consideration of a piece of legislation in 2019 that I believe provided a foundation for allowing for unconstitutional processes up to and including violations of the 14th Amendment. But those are different charges, and that's a different case from the one I just identified. However, it does bring up considerations of the question regarding permission to prosecute, and the concept of permission to prosecute as being in consideration of self as a body politic representing the people of the United States as opposed to just the individual as a participant. And I contend that further proof of this, or further significance of such a consideration, has to do with the manner in which right now the people of the United States on a collective basis are being subjected to violations of their Constitution based upon a refusal of members of elected office to hold each other accountable for the intentional misinformation that is going into what is being alleged as COVID-19 as a health pandemic, and other information specifically concerning our economic welfare and well-being associated with this alleged relief and what's actually going on with this alleged relief.